All right, let's jump right in. I want you to picture a country that's just completely torn apart, not just over politics, but over faith itself. We're talking about 17th century England, a time of massive crisis where really the entire soul of the nation felt like it was up for grabs. And right in the middle of all that chaos, two brilliant minds came along, offering two very, very different ways forward.
See, this wasn't just a simple conflict between a king and his parliament. Oh no, it went much deeper than that. This was a theological battle that found its way into every single church and pretty much every home in the country. People were suddenly forced to question everything they thought they knew about God, about the church, and about how to live a good life in a world that felt like it was just falling apart.
And what a century it was. I mean, it was an absolute roller coaster. It kicks off with a brutal civil war in 1642. Then, by 1649, they've executed their king and set up a republic called the Commonwealth. And just when you think you know which way is up, boom, by 1660, the monarchy is back. Can you imagine living through that kind of constant whiplash? This chaos created a desperate need for some kind of spiritual anchor in a total sea of confusion.
And that is exactly where our two main guys come in, Jeremy Taylor and Richard Baxter. Both were incredibly devout, absolutely brilliant writers who looked at this crisis and just felt like they had to do something. But their solutions, their visions for how to heal this divided nation, well, they couldn't have been more different.
So first up, we've got Jeremy Taylor. Now, this guy was a champion of the established Anglican tradition. He was a high churchman through and through. For Taylor, the path back to peace was all about holding on tight to the beauty, the structure, and the authority of the historic church. You know, its formal liturgies, its ancient prayers, and its ordained clergy. He believed order would come from reinforcing what had already stood the test of time. And then, on the complete other side of the spectrum, you have Richard Baxter. Baxter was a more moderate Puritan theologian, and honestly, he was way less concerned with preserving old structures and much more focused on finding common ground. His whole deal was practical piety. He was this tireless voice for moderation and reconciliation, always trying to build bridges between all the warring religious factions in England.
So, okay, those are the big ideas. But how did that translate into actual practical advice? Let's start with the individual believer. I mean, when your entire world is falling apart, how do you keep your own faith from shattering too? Both men wrote these incredibly powerful guides to answer that exact question. But, as you can guess, their approaches were pretty distinct. And the contrast here is just fascinating. Taylor's book, The Golden Grove, gives you a daily framework. It's a collection of prayers and hymns designed to root you in the rich, time-tested tradition of the church. It's all about finding spiritual order through daily practice and structure. But Baxter, he wrote The Saints' Everlasting Rest while he himself was incredibly sick. His advice? Focus on heaven. He encourages this deep, internal meditation on the joys of the afterlife to give you the strength to get through the suffering of this life. So one looks to structure for support. The other looks to the horizon for hope.
And this quote, wow, it just captures the fire in Baxter's work so perfectly. He wasn't just offering gentle comfort. He was sounding an alarm. His writing is packed with this direct, passionate, and really urgent plea. He was deeply, personally concerned for the salvation of every single person, and he wanted to reach them directly, to stir their hearts towards a real, personal conversion. Now, this focus on the individual naturally leads to their advice for the church leaders. Because it's one thing to guide yourself, right? But how in the world do you lead an entire congregation, a deeply divided flock, through a national crisis of this scale? And again, we see this incredible split. In his book, Pluribus Domini, Taylor defends the formal, traditional authority of the clergy. He argues that they are set apart, that they're called to a higher moral standard to be exemplars for everyone else. The emphasis is on their sacred office and the authority that comes with it. Baxter's book, The Reformed Pastor, is basically a how-to guide for the working minister. It's all about a hands-on, personally engaged ministry, visiting people in their homes, preaching with passion, and living a deeply pious life yourself. For Baxter, a pastor's authority didn't just come from his title. It came from his hard work and his genuine care. So what was the long-term impact of these two powerful, competing visions? Well, both men left an absolutely incredible mark on Christianity, not just in England, but around the world. But their influence,
It flowed into two very different streams.
So let's just sum it all up. Jeremy Taylor, the great defender of the Anglican tradition, he gave the church these works of incredible literary and poetic beauty, really strengthening it from the inside. His influence still echoes today in the majesty of formal liturgical worship. And then you've got Richard Baxter, the Puritan reconciler. He focused on pastoral diligence and personal conversion, and his work became a cornerstone for nonconformist churches and a huge inspiration for the later evangelical revivals.
So here's the key takeaway. When faced with the exact same crisis, these two brilliant thinkers offered two profoundly different solutions. One path was to double down, to reinforce and beautify the traditions that had anchored the nation for centuries. The other path was to build new bridges and call for a more personal, urgent kind of faith to try and unite a fractured people. And all of that leaves us with a question that is just as relevant today as it was back in the 17th century. When society feels like it's coming apart at the seams, what do we need more? The stability that comes from tradition, or the flexibility it takes to forge a new kind of unity? It's a debate that Taylor and Baxter started, and it's one that, we are very much still having